Hello, Year 10. So we're going to begin with a quick recap of last lesson. So we're looking at the Great Sioux War and the Battle of Little Bighorn. So just a reminder, the causes. So in 1874, gold was discovered in the Black Hills of the Great Sioux Reservation. So thousands of whites rushed to the hills, breaking the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. The US government actually offered the Sioux $6 million for the land, or $400,000 a year to mine there. But the Sioux refused, and the US government said that Sioux raids against the miners broke the treaty agreement and the land was forfeited. That meant the Sioux would have to give up the Black Hills because the US accused them of going back on the Treaty of Fort Laramie of 1868, where they promised they wouldn't attack white settlers. So thousands of angry Sioux left the reservation to join Chief Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse to fight the US Army. And the US Army was ordered to force the Indians back on to the reservation. So the events, most famously, Custer's 7th Cavalry was ordered to achieve this task, to force the Sioux back onto the reservations. He found a camp of 2,000 Sioux warriors in the valley of the Little Bighorn. Recklessly, Custer attacked with just 200 soldiers. So greatly outnumbered, Custer and his men were killed. So consequences. Public opinion turned against the Plains Indians. They were no longer considered weak savages, but now a real threat. So for many in the United States, many whites and many in government, they would have to assimilate. That means start to live like white people, abandon their tribal customs, or they would die. They would be exterminated. So the US government ordered a massive increase in military force. Plains Indians were forced back on the reservation. The Sioux were placed under military control and their horses and weapons were removed. And the US government now ignored previous treaty agreements. The Plains Indians, with their violence, had forfeited, that means given up their right to these deals. They were moved to smaller reservations. The Sioux were forced to give up the Black Hills, and all Plains Indians would now be on reservations where they would be assimilated. Their culture, their way of life would be destroyed. So that's a quick review of last lesson's work. So just check that your notes are in line with those. Pause this slide to do that. Once you're done, move on to the next slide. Okay, the Great Sioux War and the Battle of the Little Bighorn. This can either be an importance question in the exam, or it could be a consequence question in the exam. So if you're looking at the importance of the events, in the short term, it's obviously a great victory for the Sioux. Custer's forces, the 7th Cavalry, are destroyed. But in the long term, the public and government are shocked by the defeat. The Plains Indians are now seen as a real threat. So the US government wakes up to the danger of the Plains Indians. So the US government is now determined to pursue a policy of assimilate or die. So there's a massive increase in military force. All Plains Indians are forced onto reservations. The government went back on previous treaty agreements and reservation land became ever smaller. So historians, when they look back at the Great Sioux War and the Sioux's victory over the US Army in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, they actually call this a Pyrrhic victory. Now, this is a very unique term. So a Pyrrhic victory is defined as a victory that's won at too great a cost to have been worthwhile for the victor. So when you describe the Battle of the Little Bighorn as a Pyrrhic victory, it means yes, in the short term the Sioux win and the Sioux triumph over the US Army. But in winning this battle, they bring down the full might of the US government and the US Army down on themselves. And that's a force they can't beat. So ultimately, the victory at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, ironically, sows the seeds of the ultimate defeat of the Sioux as a nation, because the US government turns its full attention on finally destroying the threat of the Plains Indians. So make sure you understand that, and then once you do, move on to the next slide. So now we just need to test our understanding of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. So in your book, just put this heading, explain 2 consequences of the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. And then obviously you just need to follow the clear steps for success in this question. So you have to create 2 consequences. Each consequence gets a mark out of 4. So if you look at step 1, state the first consequence. So in this example, one consequence of the Battle of Little Bighorn was that it changed public opinion on the Plains Indians. And then step 2, you have to explain the consequence. So this is the idea that the Sioux's defeat of Custer makes the US government and the US people wake up to the threat of the Sioux and take decisive action to deal with it. So that needs to be developed. So that could be one consequence. The second consequence, so step 3, a second consequence was obviously the change in government policy towards the Plains Indians that follows this recognition of the danger of the Sioux posed and the change in public opinion. So again, step 4, you would need to explain what that change in government policy was as a reaction to the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Now, to do this well, you've obviously got your notes from last lesson, but you've also got the little hint sheet that you can see here, the shaded part, and obviously your own notes. And you can see that shaded part if you download this PowerPoint from Firefly. So this next task is just to create an answer to this consequence question. Pause the slide and off you go, year 10.